Okay. Um, Good afternoon, everybody. So over the last couple of decades, I've been part of a lot of discussions around water recycling, and I feel that there's always this sort of essentially people are in these two groups where some of us can happily walk into a room and pick up a bottle of new water from Singapore and gulp it down, and there are others who would sort of pull their face at the idea, and that is what I've described as an abyss in my talk. And there are, as Professor Field just covered in her talk, there are reasons behind it. There are elements of psychological barriers and yuck factor. Before I go any further, I must declare I belong to the first group. I have drunk the new water, and so have my 80-year-old father, in fact. In the next 20 minutes, I will talk quite a bit in analogies, in fact. I will talk about Her Majesty the Queen. I will talk a bit about Indiana Jones, and if time's left, that we might come back to recycling as well. So let's start with a project that I think all of you are quite familiar with, and it is it was quite a controversial project, and I can assure you, all of you have been party to this project. If you look at the acceptance, the two lines, for and against lines to this project from when the idea first was tested with the community, the eternal optimist in me sees the blue line, which is gradually gaining support. And I think with a rightly structured program of community engagement and information, you could get to a point where, in fact, the acceptance far exceeds the rejection of the idea, and that's quite an encouraging line to see. What about Her Majesty the Queen, did I hear you ask? In fact, this project that I'm talking about is actually the project about our systems of governance. The red line is representing our acceptance of monarchy, and the blue line is our acceptance of republic. If you look at since 1953, our opinions on how we like Australia to be governed, you would see that there has been a gradual increase in the blue line of people accepting the republic. And if you are wondering what is the reason why I'm sharing this, there is quite a significant parallel between this referendum and this debate and the referendum that we had in Toowoomba, and how the community got divided between recycling and desalination. This bit here on that plot in particular is around the time very close to the vote when the series of information or misinformation, depending on your perspective, started to hit the community. Just to refresh your memories, this is what the referendum election ended up being. It was about our flag. It was about whether or not we will be able to protect the Anzac Day. It was about not giving more power to politicians. And there is quite a lot of literature out there already that talks about why the whole referendum on Republic failed. Just in the interest of time and to support my hypothesis, I'm only going to focus on the work of Ian McAllister from ANU and his co-author John Hiley from Texas. And two particular things from their conclusion that I wanted to quote. One of them was that voters had only dim knowledge about how our constitutional system works and no insight into what the proposed changes would involve. The other one is that voters who thought a republic was a good idea were split between those who voted for an indirect presidency and those who voted for a direct elected president. And if you think about it, in many ways, the idea of republic and the idea of monarchy and the debate that we've had especially during the Millennium Drought, there were a lot of parallels. For average Joe or Jill, they didn't really have enough information. Without disclosing your political allegiances, if you reflect on that we are still a monarchy, and you think about how we got why the referendum failed, a lot of us often reflect that, like, we can't believe that that was the outcome at the end of it. And it's no different to another referendum, and Professor Field already shared some of these images. 62% of the vote people who voted in Toowoomba's recycling referendum voted against the idea of recycled water. If I use the phrase from the previous slide, average voters only had dim knowledge of how water treatment works. And if I reflect on the water community at the time, and in fact, even till today, in terms of water recycling, those for water recycling, how we bring in the terms portable, non-portable, direct portable, indirect portable, and how that leads to an element of confusion amongst the community. It's very similar to how and where the Republicans ended up, in my view. Um, and yes, the Toowoomba referendum was not just about Toowoomba. It had lasting impact on the selection of options across the eastern seaboard. It had lasting impact on every city in terms of what option they picked as a drought response measure. I'm familiar with the Sydney's drought response planning. At the time, I was involved in a different capacity, and I know, and it's a public known fact, that the trigger to go down the desalination path, in fact, was meant to be when the storage level hit 30%, and we never really got there. A bit like the other referendum, till this day, we talk about in our water communities, everybody I know of, and we wonder, how did we get there? It's an interesting predicament that we face as a community. There's some good work by Dr. Anna Hurlman and Sarah Donlicher that Professor Field talked about. They've done some case study research into the Toowoomba referendum, and the council, in fact, felt that the referendum was pretty much forced upon them, because Commonwealth funding came with a condition that they need to do a referendum. And this work also highlights that Toowoomba Council's preferred approach, in fact, was meant to be a 3-year consultation program where they would have brought the community along in terms of the educational journey. It is an important point to note because, in my opinion, local government, when you compare any tier of government, in fact, local government are the experts in engaging with their local community. And the view that Toowoomba had, the original plan that Toowoomba had, if we had had that opportunity, it would have been perhaps a different outcome. Who knows? But one thing is clear, that every time we try to jump the abyss in one leap, we run the risk of falling through. And that's where I bring in my favorite series of Indiana Jones. I might just quickly play, if it works. It's a scene from The Last Crusade. For those of you who couldn't hear what Sean Connery, his father said, he said, "You must believe, boy." And it is a lot about belief, and especially for those who are on the leading edge of the bell curve. We often take leap of faith, and those leap of faiths are important in moving the industry in the direction we want to go. I just wanted to share a couple of slides. The next few slides are about some of the small leaps of faith while the community was busy in the debate around portable and then, direct or indirect reuse. What was happening in Sydney and some of these projects I was personally involved with was the first ever water mining project in Sydney, where we connected to sewer in January 2006. When we first approached the utility about with the idea of doing that, we were pretty much told to go away because it's a stupid idea. It's a completely risky, dangerous thought. And I think in many ways the persistence paid off, and we were given the permission to connect. At the same time, I should also point out that the community wasn't also quite ready for that. We had lots of discussions with parents who were worried that their kids will play on sports fields which will be irrigated with recycled water. And there were golfers who were worried about picking their balls that might be touching recycled water that will be used to irrigate the golf course. So in terms of the sort of big project thinkers out there who want to develop some massive reuse scheme, you might ask the question about what difference this small project could have made. And the answer to that is this project, in fact, was a precursor to Water Industry Competition Act in New South Wales. This is an image of Maurice Yama, the Premier at the time, who, in fact, for the first time, and he's holding a raw sewage rather, and treated water in his hand. And he announced at the time that recycling is the first line of defense against drought. So there was quite a shift in communities' acceptance just by having few pilot projects and just by having a real life project to demonstrate that what technology can do. I agree that this small project was not at the time ready for drinking, and this small step at the time was not about portable reuse. But I would point out that was a very important first step, and every project ever since has been taking us on a journey, another step closer to crossing the abyss we are all collectively trying to cross. In the organization that I work at the moment, City of Sydney, we've got nearly 17 schemes out there, from rainwater, stormwater, wastewater recycling and reuse, which are all about bringing community closer to recycling and ensuring that recycling has a legitimate place in our urban form. Recycling has a legitimate place in our city. And that legitimacy is really important when we talk about social licensing. This is just another project that we're currently working on, which is looking at creating a scheme of connected wastewater prosumers, where large buildings, hotels, and institutions will be connected to a grid. There will be consumers and producers. Another project that is bringing recycling closer to the community and building credibility on the technology that is now available to recycle water. Returning to the topic of social licensing, I think it is important to understand that the literature says that social license is when a project has an ongoing approval in the community, and the word is ongoing approval. In my current role, and I think anybody in local government, in infrastructure delivery game rather, would understand that to have ongoing approval, it is more than once standing in front of community and saying this is the solution you're getting. It is a journey. It is a journey of co-creating solutions, and it is a journey of describing where we are trying to get to. It is not uncommon in city, and I'm quite proud of that we can revisit designs when there is community reluctance to accept a particular infrastructure project. And it can be frustrating, it can be time consuming, but there are no shortcuts to attaining social license. And if you are delivering infrastructure at the 11th hour when the drought's already at its extreme, the likelihood of you having time to gain that social license is very little. And often then planning rules are used to allow to disregard social license, and we end up with solutions we end up. Right time to discuss social licensing is in fact now, and I really give credit to Etsy for having this conversation, because we need to be having those conversations and getting the community legitimacy and credibility, and building that trust which is needed to get to where we are all keen to get to. I think in terms of in terms of the project, why that legitimacy is important. Just one last comment on that before I move to the next one, is that without trust, asking community to take that leap of faith, to asking community to say that you can pick that glass up and drink, is absolutely not possible. And the reality in my mind is that we don't have very many places in Australia where we can say that we've actually gone through those stages of building social license. I certainly believe that in places like City of Sydney, there is a lot of journey that's taken place. We have built a social license where there is definitely legitimacy of recycling. There is definitely credibility around recycling projects, and what that does is it allows us to have a conversation with the community about the crossing the abyss one day. But it is also important to note that there are many projects out there where large projects were built and mothballed. In my personal view, those mothballed projects are not an acceptance of credibility. In fact, in many ways, those mothballed projects, you might have to go back and rebuild that legitimacy and credibility before you can expect community to trust. So in a nutshell, I just want to summarize by saying, maybe using another analogy, and that is from the economy theory of gradualism versus shock therapy. I'm of the view that if we want community to cross this abyss, we can't use shock therapy to do that. We have tried and it didn't work. The only way we can get across this abyss is through the gradualism, and I think where we have active familiarity with water recycling projects, places like City of Sydney, there is already a presence of legitimacy, presence of credibility, people to be able to experience science, and that then lends itself for an opportunity to then have that next conversation. Whereas where we have large pieces of infrastructure mothballed, we might have to go back and start building that legitimacy again. And I'll leave it at that. Thank you, Stuart.
Thank you, Amit. Plenty to think about there and to learn from for